Okay, I am on stage. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Let me get my PowerPoint up here for you. Here we go. All right, I've got a lot of folks here who are interested in Power BI. Let's build some visuals. But before we get there, let's figure out how to get our data, right? Get our data using Sky API over to Power BI for building. So we're going to feature Sky API. We're going to touch on some other options as well as we go through this. Let me introduce myself. I'm Rebecca Sundquist, a strategic consultant here at Blackbaud. I'm speaking to you from Kansas City, Missouri, and I've been working with fundraising data and technology for 21 years here. So today I'm going to try to highlight the journey. I'm going to illuminate for everyone, why is it so complicated? Or why does it feel complicated? What are all the steps to getting data from my Blackbaud database up to Power BI and then subsequently publishing to the service and being able to refresh on a schedule, right? We're going to look at a couple of different options just generally along that journey to accomplish those steps. And then I'm going to go into additional detail on some alternatives. And we'll talk about the support that you have right now through your Blackbaud community. So without further ado, there are a lot of steps that I've outlined here because I'm trying to break it down into the little trip up points that we get stuck on. And those trip up points are typically connecting to data. When you are getting started in Power BI Desktop, you know what, I've jumped into this and I've without pausing to mention, there's a document that you can download right now in Goldcast under Docs. You'll find a handout. And as I go through this presentation, I'm going to have some links to templates that have been published on the Blackbaud community, and that document will allow you to click on those links and go to those. Now, I don't recommend that you go ahead and open those right now during our presentation, but for later, you'll be able to go back to that handout and interact with the links that you're going to see presented throughout this presentation. I'm assuming that most folks coming in here are at a point where you have maybe done some LinkedIn learning or used some Microsoft resources, watched some guy in a cube YouTube videos to learn how to use Power BI Desktop to build visuals. And now you're at the point of, but how do I get my Blackbaud data into Power BI Desktop? So that's why on these stepping stones I've highlighted, we're probably starting with Power BI Desktop open and saying, what now? I need to make a connection to data. Sometimes your data is going to be stored in a repository, and so you might need to make that connection to the repository where you've stored that data. But even to get the data into the repository, if you're using Sky API, you've got to unlock your connection to Sky API. So we'll talk about that step on this journey as well. And then finally, once we get all the way up to the Power BI service, the Power BI service also needs to make a connection either to that repository or all the way back through another method. And sometimes that's going to require a data gateway. So we're starting with this concept of all these steps to get data from our database into Power BI Desktop and subsequently to the Power BI service. And stay tuned because we'll also talk about Fabric and at the tail end here. So step one, getting data. In Power BI Desktop, you're likely already familiar with the Get Data option, and we're going to take a deeper dive now into the connections that are available there. You might have already worked in Power BI with local files, an Excel workbook, a text file. Another type of connection would be SQL Server database, would be treated as an on-premises repository. And then there's also cloud connections. So a web service or a SharePoint folder might be your repository. And I mentioned we'll talk about Fabric and the OneLake catalog a little bit as well. But hopefully you've all heard a little bit of a whisper about the custom connector that's available. And that's where we're going to start because the custom connector allows us to skip a couple of steps on this journey. It cuts out the repository Because when you're coming in here, my assumption is you're thinking, I'm going to open up Power BI Desktop and I'm going to connect to my Razor's Edge database or Financial Edge NXT and start building my reports. This Power BI Custom Connector is the tool that allows you to do that. And we'll talk about the benefits of that is that you're skipping over the repository. If you didn't want to be storing your data somewhere in between, then you're writing that data directly into your Power Query in Power BI Desktop. And the connector is fairly easy to navigate once you get familiar with how to use it. However, the cons are, and maybe you've discovered this already if you have gone through the connector's documentation, first of all, it's only built to support the Razor's Edge NXT and Financial Edge NXT. The endpoints are limited to Sky API endpoints that get a whole list of records because we're not going to be sitting there telling it ID by ID which constituents record to pull in. We need to just get constituents, get GIFs, get the funds descriptions, and start building our model from the bulk data. And so it's great that we're able to get those lists of information, but as you explore the endpoints that are available in Sky API, you'll find that there are only certain fields that are available when we're getting a whole list of constituents or a list of GIFs. And you might find that you're needing some more information that's not available in the connector. Also, the custom connector is still dependent on that data gateway step that you see in our stepping stones here. So if you don't know where to start with that custom connector yet, it is available on GitHub. So the custom connector is developed by the Blackbaud community. These are our clients who have kicked us off, and all thanks to Grant Quick, who really got this started and opened up the connector for additional input into this open source development. And members of our community can make additions and put in pull requests to continue to improve upon the Power BI connector. But it is not something that is owned by Blackbaud support. However, you can get started with it at GitHub, and I recommend that you start with the README documentation that walks through how to get started. Here's the trick that is so critical to anything related to Sky API. You must have a Sky application that is added to your environment so that your environment has granted the right scope of access to the application. And in this case, it's going to be a read-only access that an application would be asking for. The README documentation that I just highlighted on the GitHub walks you through how to create an application for Power BI Connector. And so you can read more about that, and the piece that might be missing in the stepping stones that I was describing is the fact that this application is the connection, is required for that connection to Sky API. So I wanted to put on a screenshot a picture of what that connector looks like when you do open it up. When you're using Connect to Data, you would be clicking on the option that's called Blackbaud Beta Custom if you've got that connector set up after walking through the GitHub documentation. And then you're able to navigate through different types of different APIs within Sky API, and each of those expands to the endpoints that you can start accessing. So we can get all GIFs. Now that might be too many GIFs for the scope that you need your report to cover. So notice that you can also access lists of GIFs. So you can create a private list or a public list that would define within the Razor's Edge NXT which GIFs you want to pull into your Power BI report. Now, in each of those cases, you're going to get the exact same fields because it's the Sky API endpoint that determines which fields come back when you pull in a list of GIFs. There's more to learn about how to expand those GIFs down to their splits and to get that additional information. And you can learn more with a template that I've published that's using the Power BI connector and walks through how to expand your GIF splits and additional information. But this connector, being a custom connector, requires a data gateway. And that's because the connector is a physical file that lives on the machine where you're accessing the data. So if you're using Power BI Desktop from your laptop, then that connector must live on your laptop. Once you publish to the Power BI service, you're going to need to use a data gateway as that physical location that's providing the authentication, and the connector must live on that data gateway. So that could be a virtual machine, but you have to have your connector installed there as well. So what if we're not liking the idea of a data gateway? We want to try another method. This is the method that I walk through in our regional workshops, which is to leverage Power Automate to call the data out of Sky API through Sky API, save the data into SharePoint, and then in Power BI Desktop, it's the SharePoint folder connection that we're using to access the files that you've created through Power Automate. We skip over the data gateway with this method because SharePoint in the Microsoft tenant, Power BI service in the Microsoft tenant, they're able to talk to each other through the same authentication. And so if you are using a SharePoint site where you have access and or Power BI service workspace where you have access, then you're able to pull the data all the way through. So our pros here are that in Power Automate, there are certified connectors that have access to even more endpoints than just those list endpoints. So we can start to get a little bit more specific, pulling constituent level details. However, that still might not make sense on a bulk level. If you're storing data, you're storing your files in SharePoint, you can have an audit trail there, monitoring change history on your files, or time stamping, date stamping the file names to keep track of file history. And of course, we're skipping over that data gateway. Now the con here, perhaps you didn't want to use a repository, you really like the idea of going straight into Power BI Desktop. And Power Automate does have a learning curve, but we've got a lot of support for you there as well. So we do have a template for a Power Automate flow that is actioning on the Query API. So with Query API, you're able to then access anything you can create a query on. And that unlocks a new level of access that's not available in the Power BI connector at this time, right? So instead of being limited to those get list endpoints, you can get your query result through the flow that Ashley's published out here. I'll provide some more information at the end about how you can learn more about how to import that flow and action on it. Here's a little peek at what that flow looks like. Just the concept of Power Automate connectors that are available to grant you the access you need to take these actions. So first, I want to highlight that Power Platform comes with a load of standard connectors, and just highlighting one of them here is SharePoint. So you can, of course, connect to SharePoint to move files around or save files, create files as you need to. And because SharePoint connectors are standard, there's you can access them with a free level of Power Automate licensing. But then Blackbaud has partnered with Microsoft to certify some connectors for use that leverage Sky. And one of those being the Blackbaud RENXT query that's going to allow us to execute the query job, monitor its status, and then pull the results when it's complete. These connectors being certified are considered premium connectors, and so they do require a premium license with Power Automate. Now, you would only need to license the users who are actually building and managing your flows, so that might only be a couple of people in your organization. But here we demonstrate that it is the Blackbaud RENXT certified connector that has the action called Start a Query Job, and that kicks off our flow. There is still the concept of that Sky application that we talked about earlier with the Power BI connector. I said, you've got to create a Sky application, and that README document tells you how to create it. Well, here with Power Platform, an application's already been created for you, and it's available in the marketplace. So you can browse the marketplace for Power Platform to find that application, and then if you have manage permissions, you'd be able to connect that application to your environment and approve the scope of connectivity that's permitted there. So I've talked about two different types of connections. Both of them are actually leveraging two different applications. Why is this? The Power BI connector is a custom connector, um, and it's really along the lines of what Microsoft would consider a data factory connector. It's built for data analysis and visualization, whereas the Power Platform connectors are all about workflow automation. The Power BI connector is optimized for batch data, processing those lists of information and transforming on a batch level, whereas Power Platform connectors are really about triggering actions and moving data efficiently and just on that workflow automation again. Microsoft's certification program for data factory connectors is currently on pause as they shift focus to fabric connectors. And so this is why you're stuck with a custom connector at this time that is open source and managed by our Blackbaud community, where the Power Platform connectors is a different certification process where Blackbaud's partnering very closely with Microsoft to continue bringing new connectors to Power Automate. So I do want to go through some alternate paths. I'm going to go through these a little bit quickly, but just giving you an overview of some of the templates that are available for alternate paths. So when we were looking at the idea of using SharePoint as a repository, using Power Automate to get the data to SharePoint, it is possible to skip over that repository and get that data directly to Power BI using a web call. That web call is just simply reaching out to Power Automate and saying, execute your flow and give me the data that comes out at the end of it. That, of course, that actually does help to skip over the data gateway as well. So it's excellent to maybe, if you wanted to skip the repository and the gateway, this could be a very attractive solution. But one con there is that Power BI is not able to authenticate to Power Automate through that web call. So you're actually calling Power Automate anonymously. And of course, that's a big red flag. But Alex Wong has posted a template that adds in some authentication, saying, well, let's store an authentication key in a SharePoint list. And if Power BI is able to access that list and Power Automate's accessing that list and those keys match up, then we're going to allow access to that flow. So that is an option to explore if you're very, desperate to cut out the middleman of SharePoint. Another option is to skip Sky API and work with file movement directly. So I'm talking about using a Power Automate flow that is an SFTP connector to access your SFTP from the Razor's Edge and move those files into SharePoint. So of course, that opens up the possibility of using export rather than strictly the query API. But a con with that is that in order to fully automate, you would be relying on Blackbaud's queue feature to schedule the exports or query results, and then subsequently Power Automate would need to be scheduled to follow up on that. What does that look like? We have a template from Dan Snyder where he provided this, he called it the gateway free Power BI data refreshes, because once that data is in SharePoint, of course, you don't have to use that gateway. And you can see the flow is very simple, just using standard connectors, so a free level of Power Automate licensing, monitoring the SFTP for when a file is added, and then creating that file in SharePoint and cleaning up the FTP. Now, what about Microsoft Fabric capacity and the fact that Microsoft's no longer renewing Power BI premium capacity SKUs, pushing everyone into Fabric capacity? So the really exciting thing about Fabric, of course, is that it opens up all of these tasks. The tasks that we're most concerned about are getting data, storing that data, and then visualizing that data in Power BI. So you are able to do those steps. In this case, a connector for getting that data would be essentially the old data factory style of connector, and so we still we're not able to leverage those Power Automate connectors unless we've included Power Automate in that pipeline that would be getting data. We're doing really good here, so I might actually get time to look at some questions. But I want to make sure that you all feel supported and that you know what resources are available to you. Of course, we've got Blackbaud University, and one reason I wanted to highlight these items that are available from Blackbaud University is because as I shared Power Automate flows with you, you need to know what to do with that file. And this Power Platform Templates online learning walks you through how to import that template into Power Automate and how to adjust it to work for you. So I highly recommend that you start there if you do want to try any of these Power Automate flows. And the Power Platform overview is going to talk more about the connectors, so that's useful as well. And then we do have instructor-led training for those who are subscribing to our Blackbaud University learning paths. Of course, I assume that everyone here is already familiar with our Sky community, and you can link into that and ask any questions there to the community and check to see what folks have been saying about Power BI specifically. I highly encourage you to join our Power Platform user group because any questions that I'm not able to answer today, I hope to pick up on our next user group, which I didn't confirm before I got on here live, but it's typically every second Wednesday of the month. So I'm hoping we'll have one next week. I don't know if we'll all be too wore out after BB Dev Days, but I think it's on the schedule. And lastly, I want to invite you to join me in person. I'll be at BBCon the day before BBCon kicks off doing a Power BI workshop for one day. I'll also be in Chicago in September, Houston in November. These are 2-day workshops where we'll be walking through the method of using Power Automate Flow to get the data in SharePoint, and then Power BI is referencing SharePoint. Of course, in that workshop, we'll have time then to also talk about building the visualizations. And we've got these same types of sessions for Power Automate as well. And our Blackbaud Europe office is getting ramped up to start presenting these in-person workshops for Power Automate. So London, June 24th, we'll have an in-person workshop. Unfortunately, I don't get to go. All right, so I see some of these questions here, and Samantha is backstage with me. She can go ahead and launch our survey if that hasn't launched for you yet. Let me read through these chats. So where do I want to start? I saw the question about where would you start, Power Automate or Power BI first? So one reason that I've presented so many options here is so that you can start with Power BI and then work your way into Power Automate. I'm hopeful that the templates will help you get that rapid start, but with Power Automate, you'll need to attend the Blackbaud University training that I pointed out to help you understand how to import those flows and how to work with them at a basic level. I see the question about not clear about skipping the data gateway. So what I was referring to is that the data gateway is necessary when you're accessing any data that's essentially on-premise or inside your network and protected in your network. If you have loaded your data up into SharePoint and you're storing your files there, then your data is in the Microsoft tenant. And that's the same tenant where you've got Power BI service running. So you're able to access SharePoint from Power BI without using a gateway. However, the custom connector requires that on-premise connector file to live on the gateway. And so that's where that comes into play. A gateway would also be required if you're using a SQL Server warehouse, or SQL Server database. The gateway is where the credentials to that warehouse are stored, and potentially your warehouse is saying, well, I'm only going to allow listed IPs or something like that. So gateways would be necessary for data that's really protected inside your network and not living already in the Microsoft tenant. So I see the question about if we don't have Blackbaud University, how can we access the training? So I know that we've got a training session happening at BB Dev Day. So anyone who's not registered for that will be able to still access it, right? Access the recording. And I'm sorry, I don't have that like on the tip of my fingers to drop into the chat. Thank you, Dan Snyder, for dropping in a link to where to start between Power BI and Power Automate with thoughts from our community members. Okay, that's interesting that so who is that? Pamela, the Power BI connector now says, please request your vendor contact Microsoft about the certified connector program. But I'm also very disappointed that it's no longer working for you. So that is surprising. And I would think that I would have heard that before now if it was the case for everybody. So I would want to make sure that your application is added to the environment properly, but it sounds like this was a case where it was working and is no longer. Is anyone else seeing that behavior? I see a question, confusion between premium per user Power BI licenses, pro licenses. So yes, once you've published your report to the Power BI service, then you get into Power BI licensing around who can see it. And unless we're at a Fabric F64 license level, it's going to be a per user license. Anyone trying to view that report needs to have at least a Power BI Pro license. So what I mentioned about the premium licenses was specifically premium capacity. So that would be the P1 SKU is now equivalent to an F64 SKU, I believe. But the thing about Fabric SKUs is that there are also lower levels of Fabric capacity. So we can start with the lower level, but anything less than an F64 SKU means that we're doing Power BI Pro per user licensing. So we do already have a lot of BB Dev Days content published to YouTube from prior BB Dev Days, and I know that I did a session in 2021 on, it was specific to Blackbaud CRM. I'm also going to be doing another session like this that's going to be specific to Blackbaud CRM, but I'm answering the question about other trainings for Blackbaud and Power BI. Yes, we have prior Dev Days published to YouTube. All right. The big question is I've put all of these options out there. What's the best way to always have updated data in the reports from our Razor's Edge NXT? And don't always is relative. You're going to be importing the data on a schedule, but I'm just going to encourage you to explore these different options because with the Query API, you can get the very targeted data that you need, whereas Power BI Connector is a little bit more limited, requires gateway. I can't say what's best and what's going to work for every scenario. And I think we're pretty much at time here. Oh, thank you, Dan, for replying there. Thank you all. Hi, Haley. Thank you. Hi, Elizabeth. Take care, all. Catch you on the next one.